I was told if a person comes out of the basement, don't let them go.
It was so putrid, we literally had to get the fire department out there.
When I first met Pazuzu, he told me that he was the gatekeeper of hell.
Hello, my name is Zach Moss. I study U.S. security as well as kind of the criminal justice system. I also have experience working for a CSI lab for approximately 3 years. Now, today I'm going to be reviewing the case of Pazuzu Algarad. Now, I'm going to be using Vice's footage as well as other footage. I apologize, I'm going to have to stop the footage occasionally for copyright reasons. Now, the reason why I actually want to talk about this is because it highlights a number of issues regarding our mental health infrastructure and our prison system. Now, you might be wondering, how is this cannibal murder related to those types of things? I can't give it away. That has to do with the end. A lot of people dropped the ball and a lot of people got hurt when dealing with this particular individual. Again, most of this is going to be footage. The reason why I'm like smiling and stuff, even though we're talking about cannibal murders, is because of the fact that this has got to be, I would bet, that this is going to be the gnarliest story you've ever heard in the last year. I would bet my life savings on it, which is approximately $26.50. Now, let me give you a real quick background. So this case was from 2014. I got my little notes right here so I can be nice and prepared. So his name was originally John Lawson. However, he changed his name to Pazuzu Algarad, which is the freak chick from the original Exorcist. For those of you who are aware of what I'm talking about, this is the girl who stabbed herself with the cross in her... You know what I'm talking about. Okay, so he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, agoraphobia, which is the fear or anxiety regarding social, particularly social locations, and alcoholism. Now, an interesting fun fact about him is he actually filed his teeth as well. He filed his teeth into little points. He was a declared Satanist, and he apparently only bathed once a year and didn't brush his teeth in years because he believes that odor was the body's natural protection against infection and illness. So the very first video footage I wanted to show you is regarding his girlfriends that he calls his fiancés. Now, one of the individuals who's going to be discussed, her name is Bubbles. She ended up being an accomplice in multiple murders. Anyway, here's the footage.
North Carolina's in the Bible Belt. It's God's country. One of the reasons there was so much hype around Pazuzu, and a big part of Pazuzu's infamy in the local underworld, and the myth he was able to build up around himself, was a direct response to the evangelical Christian fervor in his community.
I do believe in the devil. The devil preys on the weak. Winston-Salem was full of weak people. I was a preacher's daughter. I was heavily involved in church.
Classic.
Doing the Lord's work. When I first met Pazuzu, he told me that he was the gatekeeper of hell. The first time I met them. I drove Amber, or Bubbles, and Pazuzu home. When I saw their front door, that's when I knew something was highly wrong. I didn't want to be there. I wanted to leave immediately. But they asked me to stay and watch a home video of theirs. The video was of Pazuzu and Bubbles dancing around naked. Bubbles lying on a bed in one scene, doing inappropriate things to herself. I knew the video made me nauseous. It was intense.
I don't know what that is.
Pazuzu in one shot had a knife.
Sexual acts,
and
maybe?
A bloody bandana on his head. Apparently, it was Josh's bandana.
Now, Josh is one of Pazuzu's friends that their friend circle had believed Pazuzu had killed. So that was the idea. I'll give you more information on that in a little bit.
From what I was told by everyone that hung out with him, they had trapped him in a basement. And they had starved him for days. And either before or after they shot him, they cut off his extremities, his arms and his legs and his penis. And they buried him in pieces. Crystal was proud to tell everyone she knew that she was involved.
He had spoken to me on several occasions that he had killed homeless people and done a whole bunch of other people really badly, shot a few people, stabbed a few people. There was never any proof to my knowledge of any of these things happening. You know, I just thought that he was trying to look cool.
Another interesting aspect about Pazuzu was that apparently he would routinely drink human blood and claimed to have eaten 2 prostitutes and then buried and burned the rest of the body. Interesting aspect about Pazuzu, though, is that he had information about cases that weren't yet solved. And so could we believe that some of these things might be true? That's probably safe to say.
I was there hanging out and Paz told me, hey, I got a person in my basement. Okay, cool, whatever, dude. It's not my problem.
Didn't decide to check? Maybe it's his friend?
I was told if a person comes out of the basement, don't let them go. No one ever made a sound. No one ever knocked on a door. No one ever did anything. I was told that there was a person in the basement. I said, sure. If they come out of the basement, I'll make sure they don't leave. Clearly thinking that they're full of shit.
And yet nobody have seen their friend?
Pazuzu looked at me, grabbed a very large knife. It was more or less a sword, but he said, I've done something. He didn't say what he had done. He said, you're gonna help me dig this hole or I'm gonna kill you.
My name is Tarina Billings, and I was the first person to come forward to the police in the Pazuzu Algarad case. Crystal Matlock, she invited Pazuzu and his girlfriend over. And so everybody's having a good time drinking. A few hours later, he starts bragging about how he shot a guy 6 times with a shotgun and how he had the body downstairs in the basement covered with cat litter and bleach to keep the smell down. And we all thought he was lying because he was drunk and we're like, he's crazy.
So overall, there's 2 bodies that were found. Number 1 was Joshua Weltzer. Now, he was starved for days, and according to witnesses like you had just seen, his limbs were chopped off and his penis were chopped off. I assume the limbs at least would have to be chopped off after the death. The reason is because the cause of death was through a bullet hole in the head, which CSI experts can determine based off of the how the bullet comes out of the head, supplemented with if there's any tissue deposits, you could track the blood. I digress. The other person was Tommy D. Welch. Now, he was killed by Bubbles. So Pazuzu killed Joshua, and Tommy was killed by Bubbles. Now, here's the entrance of the house. So after he was arrested, police had to go inside of his house. This is very notable. The reason why I want to show this is because it really lets us in on the mind of this individual.
People would come to Pazuzu's house because they knew it was free reign. There was no rules, no anything that you had to abide by. You could piss in his carpet, you could smash a TV, you could hit somebody in the head with a beer bottle, you could throw a knife at his wall. It just didn't matter.
You knock on the door and immediately you hear a shit ton of dogs barking. And then Pazuzu answers the door. You're greeted with this smell of just ammonia and urea. It just smells like straight urine.
That's his friend.
And rotting matter, greets you as soon as that door is opened.
That's Pazuzu and Bubbles.
Crazy looking enough, with the long ratty ass dreadlocks and all his teeth filed down to a point. Which later come to find out he did high as hell on meth one day.
As they do.
There was always black metal blaring at ungodly ear-shattering volumes. There was always glass getting smashed, people fighting.
People will get so drunk there that human beings would just pop a squat in a corner and take a crap. And God knows when it would get cleaned up, or the dogs might eat it, or whatever.
Something that's interesting to note about the dogs, because those are continuously referenced, is Pazuzu, he would routinely torture small animals and drink their blood. And so, I hate to say it, but a lot of the animals that we're seeing were more than likely killed and tortured to death between Pazuzu and his friends, particularly with Bubbles.
It's like this mad place where you can act out your darkest and sickest fantasies to no judgment. And actually, I can see the appeal for a generation here who is having a hard time even finding a job. You know, the idea that you can go somewhere judgment-free with no pressure on you, somebody's gonna give you drugs and let you behave however you want, there's an appeal to that.
Nothing that could prepare you for what you saw inside Pazuzu's house.
This is the police webcam, or not webcam, police footage.
Yeah, that's definitely unfit for human habitat.
Yeah, that's
Still
something.
had a smell. It was at the house.
Ooh.
Is that thing dead?
No, it's alive. Going down the hallway, there's a bathroom on the right-hand side. Just up from that was Pazuzu's room. The room that we referred to as the altar room,
Holy shit.
it was so putrid. We literally had to get the fire department out there. We wore hazmat gear and Scott air packs into that
But did he
room.
sleep in that room? I couldn't imagine him sleeping there. Like, what section? Would he just sleep on top of the knives and garbage?
You would be hard-pressed to be inside the house and not think that the person who lived there was capable of about anything.
Okay, wow. All right, where do we start with that? So first, the county that Pazuzu lived in, they declared that the house was unfit for human habitation. As you could imagine, that was quite something. Look, I've been to my fair share amount of parties, but that one's particularly notable. So what they had found was that there was a code officer, and in his report, he had said that the house contained hundreds of dead and living flies. Now, again, you couldn't really see too much because obviously the footage was a little jacked up, but there's feces and urine that had been ground into the floor and the walls so much to where it would apparently be nearly impossible to be able to ground out. Also, there's decayed animal parts and remains inside of cages, dried blood-like substance on the walls, and, well, apparently a couple bodies. Anyway, let's keep going. That's the backyard. Those are really lazy, shallow graves you just saw.
Cat jumped over and scared the shit out of me.
By mid-afternoon, they had located a skeleton. It looked like they had just dug a shallow grave and just folded them up into it.
All right, we get the point. 2 people died, one of which was Joshua Frederick Welzer and Tommy Dean Welch. So what I wanted to show you guys next, this would be like the part 2 of this segment, would be how does this case end between Pazuzu, the cannibal murderer, and the mental health facilities and the prison system. So Pazuzu, to give you guys a real quick background here, you know, he was locked up May 13th, 2015. And so the video footage I'm going to be showing you is the criminal justice system trying to move Pazuzu from one location to another, continuously rotating him because they didn't have the ability or the training to be able to deal with somebody at his caliber, because allegedly this guy wouldn't stop trying to kill himself. Here we go.
We often, as Americans, like to listen to the narrative of the police and the court system and the education system. And the reason we like to do that is we like to think that those systems are working for us. In North Carolina, our justice system has made it really difficult for the public to ever peel back the veil and see what really went on.
This morning, the sheriff's office was notified that Pazuzu Algarad had died while they're at Central Prison in Raleigh. Mr. Algarad was discovered shortly after 3 a.m. He was unresponsive and had a wound to one of his arms. Mr. Algarad was sent to the Adult Corrections Central Prison on a safekeeping order.
What we know from the autopsy and from what prison officials have said is that he used some kind of instrument to cut himself. And what they said is they don't know exactly what kind of instrument it was.
Pazuzu was held first in Forsyth County Jail. We had heard from corrections officers off the record and from other inmates that Pazuzu had been trying to bite through his arm and trying to do so rather dramatically on the full moon. He was transferred out of there because he had been biting himself there.
Jesus. So they couldn't stop him from biting himself, potentially
They found the
to
guy
death.
in an 8x10 cell, and they found all of his other personal effects, so it's kind of hard to understand how they possibly couldn't find the weapon. He gets sent away from the Forsyth County Detention Center because they say they can't take care of the guy because he keeps trying to kill himself and they can't stop him from doing it. So the people in Central Prison know what he's apt to do. Somehow he gets time to be alone long enough to chew into his arm, enough to bleed to death. It's very important to understand in North Carolina that the Department of Public Safety oversees the Department of Corrections. So when there's an incident such as the suicide of John Lawson, they're tasked with investigating wrongdoings in an organization that they're also managing, which seems like a conflict of interest.
We're gonna go back to that part.
Got rid of the Dorothea Dix Forensics Unit, which is where we used to send people with mental illness. We are slashing budgets from the national to the state on mental health care. What it does is it puts all the burden back on the corrections officers to deal with people with serious mental illness. And in the prison system, about 2,500 open jobs that they can't fill because the jobs don't pay crap, they're super dangerous, and nobody wants to do that stuff, even in these little towns where they're economically depressed.
Well then, all right. It's like one of those, like, where do we start? And I'm going to try to keep this as succinct as humanly possible. So he started at a place called Forsyth County Jail, and he was transferred to Central Prison for safekeeping because they couldn't figure out what exactly they're going to do. Now, he was found dead at 4:20 a.m. in his cell at Central Prison, and he died from severe blood loss. So, what issues can we pull from this? Strike one. Department of Public Safety oversees the Department of Corrections. So, essentially, if the Department of Corrections messes up, the Department of Safety has a self-interest not to report it. So this is where we're going to dive into a couple rabbit holes here because I think it's important. And I think you guys in the long term would like to use this as a reference for the issues regarding or the flaws regarding our mental health care system fused in with the prison system. Okay, so what specific policy did they mess up? Well, they left an inmate with suicide risk alone. I'm going to read you the exact safety protocol that they have. So here's what it says. Quote, any staff may identify an inmate as potentially suicidal. When a staff suspects an inmate may be suicidal, the staff shall keep the inmate under direct line of sight supervision and initiate policy TX 111-7, self-injurious behavior. Okay, so that's a really fancy way of saying, and this isn't just a North Carolina specific policy. This kind of suicide policy is a policy that's enacted in mental health institutions, at-risk youth homes, prison systems, so on and so forth. So you always have to keep a direct line of sight. So oftentimes that's where you see the little jail cells with like a little like opening in it. So you open up this little hole and watch them. Or another situation a lot of times with more like youth risk kind of housing is they have to keep the door open and physically watch the person 24 hours a day. However, one of the issues with that is oftentimes there's halls with lights and the lights shine in, so the person on suicide watch can't even get any sleep either. So it's a cluster of a situation. So they didn't follow this, and this individual had more than likely, because it wasn't properly investigated, this guy literally turned and bites a hole in his arm. Well, more like his armpit, and he bleeds to death on a full moon. Strike two. Dorothea Dix Hospital closed in 2012 to be sold and created into a park and potentially other mental health services. Now, disclosure, I'm not a mental health expert on North Carolina's health infrastructure, so I'm not going to pretend to. However, I know a thing or two about the health infrastructure inside the U.S. as a whole. So Dorothea Dix was a mental health institution. I know that a lot of us have opinions on mental health institutions, particularly throughout history, like the 1970s and earlier, where they would overly institutionalize people who wouldn't have to be in there. So this is where, you would put your serial killer crazy person in with your Aunt Mary Jane who divorced her husband and decided to go on the road as a gypsy. They would pair those two together and utilize things like electric shock therapy. However, the downside of closing Dorothea Dix, which we can argue, obviously you shouldn't be electric shock therapy anybody, obviously, but mental health institutions should be there for people who have a mental health crisis severe enough like Pazuzu without ingraining them into the prison system that doesn't have the resources to be able to deal with them, so they chew holes in their armpits. Not fortunately, the idea at the time was that in 2001, so this situation was in 2012. In 2001, there was something called the 2001 Reform Package. Now, the idea was to replace expensive beds at Dorothea Hospital with cheaper community social service options. So the idea was like, hey, we're not going to put so many people in mental health facilities, but we're going to have more like informal, low-key places that people could stay. Well, according to Disability Rights North Carolina, so it's a nonprofit tracking these types of things, there's more than 6,000 mentally ill people who are living in often squalid rest homes and receiving little or no treatment. And so this idea that you shouldn't over-institutionalize people hasn't really prospered too much. And then that also leaves the question, what do you do with people like Pazuzu so they're not left alone? Now, they also had something called Broughton Hospital that they decided to make a new one, like a higher, better facility, but it was delayed 7 times, which is a cluster, and it was essentially replacing the old facility. So it's not like they are creating more facilities, they're just updating another one, which is a problem. So strike 3, lack of funding. There's 2,500 prison jobs that are available in North Carolina alone. Now, a kind of side note, good thing that the U.S. prison system decided to do was that they created the Mentally Ill Offender Treatment and Crime Reduction Act, the MIOTCRA, which is a mouthful and a half. Probably as much of a mouthful as Pazuzu had in his armpit. That was a program that offered $50 million per year. And the idea was through this mechanism, the act pays to expand successful programs to divert people with mental health, substances, and use disorders toward alternatives to incarceration. So it's like, hey, instead of over incarcerating these people, let's find other methods to get them on the right path. However, that program is overseen by the Department of Human Services, which has a $9.5 billion cut in 2021. Now, I'm no expert. But if you're having an organization that's receiving budget cuts to oversee another organization, that kind of seems like that would not be as effective. I could be wrong. Overall, the Department of Human Services is going to expect a $1.6 trillion cut over the next 10 years. Wow. So what do we do with people like Pazuzu? What do we do? Well, I guess we're supposed to throw them in prison and hope for the best. People like Pazuzu are 10 times more likely going to prison than they are mental health facilities. People like Pazuzu with severe mental health illnesses, there's approximately 356,000 of them in prison versus 35,000 people like him in mental health facilities. Mental health facilities right now only have 28% of the beds that are actually needed. Now, I'm no expert here, but I think between the pandemic, potential Great Depression, and all these other things are going to augment and amplify mental health issues. So perhaps we shouldn't try to cut the budgets for the Department of Human Services, for example. Maybe we should keep Dorothea Dix Hospital. Perhaps Pazuzu is a really good example about what happens when you have an individual who could be studied and we could use him as a case study about what to do with people like him. But we can't do that because he had died. Now, we're not going to have this debate about whether he deserves or not doesn't deserve to die. What is important here is to note that it's not up to us because he died. And it was a result of a lack of maintenance and care on the side of our justice system. But anyway, after that, I think I'm going to need a drink. Or 6. Thank you guys very much.